Hello and welcome to the Retro-Spec workshop. I'm Dan, and guys, I really appreciate you joining me here for my first ever video here on YouTube. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how I built the iconic Jugger-Nog machine from Call of Duty Zombies.
Alright, so before we dive in, here's a little background for context. The Jugger-Nog machine is a fictional soda vending machine from Call of Duty Zombies. For a small price, players can grab a bottle of Jugger-Nog, a chemically enhanced Perk-a-Cola that boosts your health and helps you survive more hits from the undead. It's widely considered the most essential perk in the entire mode, and without it, survival becomes nearly impossible. Like the other perk machines in Zombies, Jugger-Nog is styled after a retro mid-20th century soda dispenser, complete with a glowing red cabinet and a catchy jingle that plays every time you interact with it. It's taken many forms over the years, but I'm going to be looking to try and capture the early eras from World at War to Black Ops 2, where the machine first debuted.
So now you're all caught up, let's bring this project to life. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to start things off, I found this retro style refrigerator on Facebook Marketplace that had almost the perfect dimensions for this project. But before I could start adding anything to it, I had to start by stripping it down to a shell and remove any unnecessary components. The fridge was in great condition, but it hadn't been used in quite a while, so there was quite a lot of mold built up inside, but with a little TLC it was back to normal. However, it was quite difficult getting rid of the smell, so I used some essential oils on the inside to cover up the smell and prevent bacteria buildup. Now that the fridge was ready to go, I hopped onto Fusion 360 to start designing how everything was going to come together. The first thing that I had to make was a shelving system that could hold all the bottles and use gravity to feed them into the dispensing mechanism. I created these using acrylic sheets that I cut to size on a laser cutter. I used acrylic as this would be easy to clean and wouldn't be affected by the cold temperatures of the fridge. Once all the acrylic had been prepared, I began marking up where the shelves would be fitted. I had to ensure that they had enough of an angle to feed the bottles through the machine, but not too much to the point where they'd start flying out. The shelves were reinforced with steel brackets to support the weight of the bottles being stacked on them. With this setup, the fridge can hold up to 22 bottles. Okay, with the acrylic shelving done, the next thing that I had to move on to was the front panel of the machine. Because I was making this section from scratch and I didn't want to waste any materials, I started off by making a cardboard prototype. After I completed the shelving system for the bottles, I moved on to start creating the front panel. This would house the mechanism that connects the handle on the front to the inside of the machine. I started out by marking up a thin sheet of MDF. I use this material as it's easy to cut and paint, but also because it has enough flexibility to wrap over the angled section towards the top, which we'll get into later. After everything was marked up, I used a jigsaw to cut the holes for the handle, bottle opener and dispensing chute. I went back afterwards with files and sanding paper to clean everything up. Once the front face of the panel was finished, I began working on the frame that this piece would be mounted to. I marked up some timber and cut it to the size and shape that was required. It was at this point where my old vice decided to give up on me, and I had to bring in reinforcements. The top and bottom of this panel would have to be curved slightly to fit flush up against the front of the fridge. I connected the frame together using some PVA wood glue and corner brackets as I didn't have any dowels available at the time, but these did the job well. These same corner brackets will be used to mount the panel to the front of the machine. It was at this point I began to fill out the front section and install the bottle opener and handle. Now that everything was ready, it was time to bring it all together. I mounted some of the internal mechanics, which I'll get to shortly, and fixed the front plate to the frame using more PVA and wood tacks. This is where the flexibility of the MDF was used to shape over the angled top of the front panel. Once the glue had cured, I went back with my electric sander and smoothed everything out. I also rounded the edges of the corners to match the aesthetic seen in game. After sanding, I went back with some filler to smooth over any joints or holes. And once this had set, I gave the piece a final sanding. Then it was time to start planning how I was going to install this to the doors.
Okay, so this next part of the project I actually feel kind of bad for. If the original owner of the fridge is watching, I do apologize, but I had to put a hole in your door. A big one.
This hole was necessary, however, to install the ramp for dispensing the bottles. I didn't have much room to play with, so the ramp would need to be quite steep, which meant a bigger hole was required. Yeah, that wasn't meant to happen. Moving on, I cut through the door using a hacksaw, which wasn't very easy because they're angled. However, the plastic shell was quite thin and there was nothing but insulation foam underneath, so not much resistance. After cutting away at the foam, I could test fit my ramp, and it slotted in perfectly. Now I just had to clean everything up and repeat the same thing on the other door. Before I could install the ramp, I had to fuse the two separate doors for the fridge and freezer seamlessly so that they would appear to be one. To do this, I cut some timber pieces to shape that would fit perfectly between the two doors and then glued these securely in place. I then used the same filler from before to smooth over the seam as much as possible. It looked a little messy, but nothing that a coat of paint couldn't fix. It was around this time that I also added some physical details like the silver trim I made using door insulator and the air vent on the side. With everything good to go, I can now install the front panel that was bolted on through the holes that I pre-drilled earlier. And after smoothing out the seam with more filler, the machine was finally ready for some paint.
But before we move on, let's take a quick look back at the internal mechanics I had to install to make this thing work like the real one. If it was real. But this would prove to be quite a challenge, because I had to somehow connect the handle on the outside to the internal mechanism that was hidden inside. And the problem was, when you open the door, these two parts separate. So I had to think of something new.
To solve this, I created what I am calling the quarter ratchet, a mechanism that automatically locks every quarter turn. This will allow one bottle at a time to be dispensed and will prevent them from all spilling out of the machine. Once I was happy my prototype would work, I 3D printed the final design that would be mounted on the inside of the front panel. I also 3D printed a few other components that I would require. The guide rails that would feed the bottles one by one out of the machine, and the handle lever. This will connect the handle to the quarter ratchet inside of the front panel. I also made a new rod for the quarter ratchet out of aluminium to increase the durability of the part. I know I'm not using the best terminology here, but when everything comes together you can see how it will work. The weight of the bottles will push on the guide rails that are connected to the metal rod. But these are stopped by the quarter ratchet. This will only move once the handle lever pushes the bottom, allowing it to rotate 90 degrees and dispense a bottle.
At this point, everything was going really well. A little too well. It was now time to tackle the problem of the quarter ratchet becoming disconnected from the internal mechanism every time the door was open. This would be a really big issue because the quarter ratchet was the only thing stopping the internal rails from moving, and without it, the bottles would continuously spill out all over the floor.
So to fix this, I created a safety mechanism that decompresses once the door is open, pushing stoppers in front of the guide rails and preventing them from moving. This part is deactivated once the door is closed and the quarter ratchet takes over. A simple and pretty effective solution. Okay, so to try and make a little bit more sense of this, here we have the shelving mechanism. This is the safety that decompresses, allowing the bottles to spin out of the machine. Without this, they'd come spilling out as soon as the doors open. But as you can see, when it's compressed, the rails are able to spin and dispense the bottles. It's only when the quarter ratchet that connects through the door links with the guide rail that it then takes over and holds the weight of the bottles.
Okay, with all that out of the way and the front panel installed, it was time to finally add some primer. Unfortunately, my camera decided to die at this point, which is a real shame because it was amazing, really satisfying to see the whole thing come together and start to look like one solid moulding.
Anyway, after a layer of primer was down, I masked off the bottom of the machine and added some colour. I went with an off-white, almost cream colour, trying to match the game's aesthetic as close as possible. With the top painted, I can move on to painting the red on the bottom. And I know, the fridge was already red. Trust me, the colour wasn't right, and it would have been an absolute nightmare to work on later down the line, because the glossy finish of the plastic. But with the base colours added, I can move on to adding some of the decals that will give the machine some personality. Starting off with the coin slot section on the front panel. This was comprised of layers of metal plates that were both sublimation printed and diamond engraved to give it a really authentic look. I also added a 3D printed coin slot and coin return section to this panel. These pieces were later mounted onto a thin piece of painted MDF.
Next, I decided to work on the iconic lantern that adorns the top of the machine. And I considered many different ways of trying to make this, such as cardboard tubing, plant pot, a bin, a bucket. But I wanted this to feel as real as possible, and therefore made out of some kind of metal. Luckily, I had a contact who hooked me up with a piece of industrial piping that would be the perfect size for this part.
I used a PVC pipe fixture to mount the lantern on top of the machine. I used some more MDF to create both the front and back panel of the lantern that I cut and sanded to shape. I also cut down some PVC pipe to use for the sides of the lantern. Everything was looking good, I just had to glue it all together. And to do this, I used some extreme strength liquid nails all-purpose adhesive. This stuff would make sure everything was securely held together, but could also be sanded down and smoothed out. And with the shell of the lamp finished, it was time to paint.
Starting off with a coat of primer, I then went back with the same off-white cream colour from the top of the machine.
This is when one of our neighbours decided to stop by and check out the project. I should have built a flamethrower. But for now, this will have to do.
Moving on, I had to add some holes to the bottom of the lantern so it could be connected to the top of the machine. And you remember how happy I was a minute ago that this was solid metal? Yeah. Turns out that this was a big issue because it was incredibly hard to drill through. But eventually I was through and I could mount the lantern on top of the machine and add the light inside. The last thing was to add the curved glass lens which I took from a wall clock. And this piece of thin white acrylic with the distressed Jugger-Nog logo printed onto it.
With the lantern secured, I can now move on to adding the graphics to the side of the machine. Now I messed around with templates and stencils, but in the end I decided to go the old school route and do everything by hand. Why did I do this to myself?
I started by roughly mocking up the designs with a pencil and then going back with some markers and eventually paint. And yes, this was just as time consuming as it looked. But in the end, I think it was worth it and I think it has a really genuine old school look.
After spending far too long meticulously applying all those little intricate details to the machine, the next step was to cover it all with a layer of dirt.
Okay, so not real dirt, but it was time to now add some weathering to the machine. Starting out with some watered down acrylics of various browns to build up layers of grinding dirt that would have accumulated over years of neglect. This was a long process of applying and then wiping away, slowly trapping any leftover paint in all the corners and seams. I applied this weathering technique over the whole machine, trying to match the distressed look seen in game. This was taking forever though, so to speed things up I upgraded to an airbrush. And this worked a little bit too well, as you can see here where I overdid it a little on the front panel and I had to strip it back off. Yeah, that was frustrating.
Weathering is an extremely long and time consuming process, but after applying layer and layer of dirt, being careful not to overdo it in certain areas, you can really see the whole thing start to come together, and that all the efforts are worth it.
And finally, to finish out the weathering, I dry brushed some silver paint into areas that would be likely to get scratched over time. Next up, I added a simple RGB LED light strip to the back and underside of the machine to give that infamous red glow. Okay, alright, let's lift this thing back. Careful. Alright, cool. Yo, what's that? Huh? Yo, what the heck? Guys! Yo! Whoa! There's like some loose change in here. I haven't seen these kind of coins before, but they're pretty cool. I'm gonna keep these.
Alright, with the lights added and some spare change in my back pocket, it was time to move on to what was arguably the hardest part of this entire project, finding out what bottles I was going to use. I searched all over the place, every shop, every website, I even approached wholesalers directly, but no one was able to help me. So until the time comes where I'm able to find a more reliable source for these bottles, I had to resort to using kombucha.
Unfortunately, I'm not really a fan of kombucha, but this was pretty good. Okay, back to the bottles. I painted the lids red and then began adding custom vinyl labels that I made earlier. I had to ensure that all of the bottles were the same, and if there was the slightest misalignment, I had to start over again. But luckily, the other labels went on nicely, and soon I had some bottles ready to be filled with Jugger-Nog. At some point in the future, I would love to create custom cocktails for these bottles, but for now, I'm going to use the closest thing that I can think of. That's right, Mountain Dew Code Red. Every time I think of Jugger-Nog, my mind goes to this drink, mostly because of the colour. I mean, just look at this stuff. It's like it was made to be Jugger-Nog. It was also just a little bit hard to resist drinking them all before the project was completed. Alright, save some for the showcase.
Okay, we're almost at the end. Just hang in there. One thing left. The iconic Jugger-Nog jingle. To achieve this, I created a very simple setup using an Arduino Uno microcomputer that I coded to connect to a simple motion detector.
To do this, I used the following: a VS1053 audio shield mounted to the top of an Arduino Uno, a HC SR04 ultrasonic module.
Okay, so just a quick side note, I was originally planning on using one of these. This is a PIR sensor. And for those who don't know, a PIR sensor uses infrared wavelengths to pick up on motion, so changes in temperature, which wouldn't be very useful inside of a fridge. Whereas the ultrasonic sensor uses sound waves to bounce off objects and detect motion, kind of like a bat's echolocation. This meant it could be used in the dark and it didn't matter what temperature it was.
I also used an 8GB micro SD card, a 5V USB battery pack, a portable speaker, a 3.5mm auxiliary cable, a USB-C to USB-B cable, try saying that 5 times as fast, and some male to female connectors. And with all that, I was able to do this. I mounted this setup onto a board and fixed it inside the machine, making sure that the sensor was pointing to the bottle feed mechanism.
As well as playing the jingle when a bottle is dispensed, I also programmed the Arduino to play other ambient noises such as buzzes and bottle clinking at random intervals. And yes, of course, it plays the theme in full.
Okay, let's avoid a copyright strike. The last final touches included a Perk-a-Cola shield to contain the bottles inside the machine, and some foam padding to protect them as they made their way through the machine. And with all that done, there was only one final touch to add: my final seal of approval.
And just like that, the project was finished. Guys, if you stuck around this long, I really do appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, this is my first video here on YouTube, so if you could please consider liking and subscribing, that would go a really long way in building this channel up and helping me to deliver more projects like this to you in the future. I want to continuously build on both the projects I'm making and the videos that I'm developing for you guys, so if that sounds good to you, stick around because I have so many more projects in the works that I'm looking forward to bringing to you. But for now, here's just a little sneak preview of some of the things that's come. Guys, that just scratches the surface of some of the things that I'm looking to bring to you in the future. I have so many more ideas that I can't wait to share. And if you have any of your own ideas, do me a favor and stick them in the comments, and you never know, they might be in a future video. But with all that out of the way, it's the moment you've been waiting for. So without further ado, please enjoy my finished Jugger-Nog project, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Now that is over with. Shots